Welcome in to the Rockies Insider. I'm your host, Patrick Lyons, and on today's Baseball Hall of Fame election results eve, there's only one guy on the planet I want to talk to, Mr. Manny Randhawa of MLB.com. Dude, what's going on, buddy? Thanks for joining me in this super fun conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that intro. I mean, the one guy are you sure? You don't want to walk that one back? I mean, there are a lot of guys you could ask to talk about this that would be very good. But thank you. I appreciate that. It's always good to be on with you, man.
Yeah. No. What we think alike in all the best ways, and we think differently in perfect ways that kind of bounce off each other and we flow and things are going to be really good. Excited as always for the big announcement on Tuesday. It's going to be the show starts at 2 p.m. Mountain Time, but the announcement won't be made until 4 p.m. Do you remember being I can't recall if you were there last year for the Todd Helton announcement or if you were there for the Larry Walker one. Were you there for any of the Saber gatherings that we had?
I was there for the Walker one, not for the Helton one though.
Yeah. I mean, that was in a way the bigger one because it felt like no Rocky is ever going to get in if Larry Walker doesn't.
Yeah, well, I mean, I didn't think it was going to happen either that night. I mean, I thought he was going to be like, just achingly short, just very close, but not quite there. So it was a surprise. It was pretty amazing.
Yeah, I had the same sentiment. I was like, he's going to fall like 4 short,
Exactly.
6 short.
Yeah.
Because as we'll talk about later on in the show, the public ballots that Ryan Spader keeps track of are more big haul than small haul. And then once you get those private ballots in, they're ticking off maybe 2-3 names tops. And, if you're at 76% right now, by the final day that everything gets calculated, you might end up being under and unfortunately being disappointed and maybe have to wait another year. My question to you is this, and I know you're a baseball guy, so for this question, sure, maybe there are better people to ask, but is the Baseball Hall of Fame the best Hall of Fame in all of sports?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, I think it would still be. I think it should still be bigger than it is. But I think I don't know all that much about the other sports Hall of Fame necessarily. But every time I see certain names getting in, I'm like, really? I mean, that it seems like it was a little bit. The bar is a little bit lower than maybe it needs to be in the other Halls of Fame. But I think baseball, the bar is too high. But at the same time, in recent years, it's been all over the place. I mean, I hate to say this because he was a good player and he's always going to be known for this. But Harold Baines, it's like the Harold Baines phenomenon where, it's like some guys are waiting 10 years when they should have been in a long time ago. And then there's Harold Baines who's getting in with the Veterans Committee. So it's just too all over the place in that sense. But I think still it's the best if you're comparing it to the other ones.
And it's the birthplace of baseball. Asterisk. We can look.
Asterisk.
Think about that. Even the baseball, even the actual museum, the actual location of the Baseball Hall of Fame has an asterisk next to it. So kind of fitting. I hadn't thought about it.
So if the name of your town hasn't, or the name of the location of it has an asterisk, then maybe you should let Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens and all these guys in.
Well, perfect timing. Let's talk about that because there are so many players that, as you said, you look at other Hall of Fames and you go, that guy's getting in. All right, maybe I'm missing something. It's a lot harder to know like who was a great offensive lineman if you're talking about the NFL. Mm-hmm. But there are players, as you said, Bonds, Clemens, Sosa, McGuire, when you're looking at the all-time leaderboards, either for career, meaning you played 15 plus seasons or whatever it is, no one has done what you've done. A very small amount have done more. And then you look at the single individual seasons. These guys' names are on the list. And then you even have other players that are just controversial in general. And it's hard to know what to do about these players. And in a way, we sort of have our answer, right? Because you get 10 years, and if you're less than 75%, the answer is we leave it to a veterans committee to do it. And I don't know that there's a better way to go about doing this, but I imagine it gets sorted out in the wash at some point. Do you think that will be the case, that we'll live in a world in which Bonds, Clemens, even Manny Ramirez is in the Hall of Fame for what they did during their careers?
Well, there's just so much mystery around, at least to me, around, how the veterans committees work in the sense of who gets to vote and why they're chosen. our friend Tracy Ringlesby has been on some of those committees for a long time. I don't know how that all happens in terms of what players, what former managers, what executives, what writers get to vote on that sort of thing. So it's hard to say. I think that if Bonds was given another 3 or 4 years, he would have gotten in. I think the same goes for Clemens because, again, the changing constituency, or I should say the changing voting block cohort of people who are writers who are voting would, I think, look more favorably upon Bonds than the ones that are kind of aging out, for lack of a better term, I guess. And so I don't know if that's the same thing is going to happen with the Veterans Committee or how quickly. So I'm not really sure. I think there has to be a better way just because we're still, talking about the Kenny Loftons of the world. Dick Allen, that was a wrong made right finally. I'm elated that he got in finally. It's too bad he got in posthumously because it's too bad you didn't get to see it, but he definitely deserves to be in there. But there are other guys, who it's like, wow, really, Lou Whitaker is one of them. There's other guys that need to be looked at again, and that's the other thing. It's like how do they come up with who to look at? So
and that resonates what you said with Dick Allen because he fell short a few times on veterans committees and also in the BBWA ballot back when it was 15 years that you could stay on it. It's interesting how you brought up Harold Baines, and sure, he's that poster child, and I think because he was first, there's probably other guys where maybe you go, Jim Cott, really? Okay, maybe. But the list of guys who are certainly in the Hall of Very Good, their first ballot Hall of Very Good players that eventually make it into Cooperstown, that list feels a lot smaller than the ones that are being held out. Like if you look at and say a small hall versus big hall, it really isn't big hall because, there are these guys who eventually do get in like a Dick Allen, but it takes far too long. And unfortunately they pass away. Buck O'Neill is one of those.
I'm shocked at how long it took for that one to happen.
I think there was a big, pronouncement at the time of like, okay, we did all this research about the Negro Leagues, and here's the last really big group going in, and he just barely missed the cut. And then they say, hey, Buck, but can you make the speech for everyone? Can you make a speech for all those guys? And of course he did it because he loves the game. And then finally they realized, well, yeah, no, he deserves to be in for his contributions, not just on the field, but off the field as, the main spokesperson, the representative of the Negro League Hall of Fame, good friend of Bob Kendrick, getting the Negro League Museum started in Kansas City. So it feels like that list of guys who had to wait too long is actually much longer than the list of guys that maybe shouldn't be in there.
I would agree with that. I think a lot of it's, we pay more attention to the guys in the list of guys who should be in, I think, because of, the injustice or outrage we feel when we see that they're not in there. But I always, I'm sure it's not as easy as I'm making it out to be here. I'm oversimplifying it. But if we could just do one big sweep again of the guys that missed that ought to be reconsidered, all of it, just do it all at once. I don't know what that would look like exactly. It wouldn't be the BBWAA. It would have to be like a veterans committee thing, I guess. But just throw everybody, have a committee that is established, your blue ribbon committee, whatever you want to call it, have it established and make their task to go through baseball history and find the guys that need to be looked at again.
Yeah, and there's plenty, I think, even from the late 1800s, early 1900s, various innovators.
Just do it all at once, and then an up or down vote on everybody. So it seems simple when you say it that way, but I'm sure there's it's more complicated than that. However, what better way to just stop, having to have guys wait? Like if Kenny Lofton doesn't ever get in during his lifetime, like that's a travesty, so stuff like that. And same with Lou Whitaker, other guys. It's like, let's not have them be the next Dick Allen where they die and they don't get in and they don't get to see it.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and sort of research this because now when we look back and you see someone as a Hall of Famer, they're a Hall of Famer, your mind doesn't go down the rabbit hole. But how did they get in? How was it a veterans committee? How many years were they still alive? Mm-hmm. And part of me almost thinks that, in a way, the Hall of Fame has always been like this. It's always been very tight at first, and then the Veterans Committee comes in to backfill for whatever reason, because at the end of the day, those guys are still getting into the Hall of Fame. So while I understand that the Baseball Hall of Fame and museum is also a business, there is this sentiment, I think, of like, well, let's just get it right the first time, because there's always going to be new guys coming up on the ballot, and there always will be new players that you can realize, you know what, this player might have been a little bit underappreciated even in their time. Now we can put them in, rather than having this spell of, okay, well, Bonds, it's going to be a 30-year arc for us to talk about. And hey, this is our business. So in a way that benefits us, but it certainly doesn't benefit Barry Bonds as a human being to have to wait that long for something that we all knew was going to happen and all know that it should happen.
Yeah. And that's why I feel like if we could just do a big sweep and get ourselves up to date, where it's like, we're not having these, I mean, it's fun to have the conversations. I mean, it would make for less entertaining Twitter content, I guess, but I mean, it's just not fair for guys to, who should be in, to have to wait, or not get in at all or during their lifetime. So I think I don't know how feasible that is mechanically or practically, but I think they should do it. They should just be like, hey, we're gonna appoint, like they do with congressional committees and things like that, where the government, they appoint these blue ribbon commissions where like they get the best of the best and they just throw them in a room and they say go. So I think that would be a good thing to do for everyone who, they obviously have to be criteria, but I'm sure that they could come up with something fair.
It almost seems to like there's a mixed message by not having in some of these controversial players, because what it does, I feel like it can both lower the standard where, okay, well, someone's in theory needs to fill in place for a Barry Bonds because, okay, he didn't do it the right way. So here's a guy who maybe doesn't have the numbers, but they did it the right way. So now this player is going to get my vote. And conversely, those small hall guys are going to go, well, you know what? If Barry Bonds isn't going to get in, that just means, you have to have the numbers and you have to have done it clean, or the quote unquote right way. So now I'm only going to be voting for one or two guys pretty much every single year. And, I don't know that it comes out in the wash. It's just, you get guys that will have 10 on the ballot, others that will have 2. And you look and, it's a small group that gets in each and every year. So it sends a weird mixed message, because when it comes to Bonds and Clemens, they were never actually suspended for breaking MLB's rules.
Yeah, technically speaking, they didn't break the rules, right?
They didn't. No.
Yeah, the same goes for Sosa. The same goes for.
Yeah, he wasn't suspended, right? But
I don't think so.
But he tested positive when they were doing that early testing, and that information wasn't supposed to come out. So that in and of itself is, very much a double standard.
Double standard. I mean, David Ortiz, I think his name was in there too, and it came out, and he's in the Hall of Fame. So,
and the commissioner that oversaw that entire period is in the Hall of Fame. Like, again, I think these guys should be in. So these aren't reasons to say like, hey, I'm, trying to hold anyone's feet to the fire. It's like, well, look, it feels like there is a standard.
The other guys should be joining them. They should be in there as well. I am all for fair play and good sportsmanship, and I think that what Bonds did was wrong. And I think what Clemens did was wrong. I think anybody who was, cheating the game, there were technicalities on whether things were banned or not. I think that's wrong. However, is that supposed to keep you out of the Hall of Fame if you were already a Hall of Famer anyway? And secondly, it's a really good argument when someone says, can you tell the story of the game during this era without talking about this guy? And I mean, Barry Bonds, it's not even a question. Barry Bonds, if you go back into before the steroids, I mean, go to his baseball reference page. He had back-to-back seasons of over 200 OPS plus. 200. That was when he was with the Pirates and Giants, or like when he first came to the Giants. And so all the video game ridiculous numbers that he put up later, in a way underscored how good he was, because he basically showed us what the limit of what a human being on steroids could do in baseball, because he was that good. He'd get one pitch a night and hit it out. And he would be walked intentionally 140 times or whatever the record is that he set. But again, if they were Hall of Famers beforehand, and that's why with Sosa, it gets a little dicey, because he was a good player. He's an all-star player, 30-30 guy, good power speed combo. Was he a Hall of Famer? I don't know. And then he started hitting 60 home runs in back-to-back seasons. So I don't know. McGwire, he was hurt so much, it's hard to say. So again, there are some question marks on some guys, but Barry Bonds, he was already 3-time MVP. Clemens is like the pitcher version of Bonds, 3-time Cy Young winner, all of that before they started doing the steroids. And we have documentation of when they did, ironically, because of the legal things that they were part of. So there's evidence of when they started. So fine, take all that away. You're telling me they're not Hall of Famers, then okay. But I think they clearly were.
Yeah, it's interesting because, as you said, can you tell the story of baseball without this player? And I always think, not necessarily of my own devil's advocate, but like, what is everybody else saying? What is everybody else thinking? And they're going, well, Manny, Pete Rose isn't in the Hall of Fame. You can't tell the story of baseball without him.
He should be.
That would be, see, you know? and I differ on that. I don't think he should be, but I'll say this, like, he is the asterisk. Pete Rose is the asterisk. He is the exception because he got a lifetime ban. He broke the rules, had a lifetime ban. Bonds didn't break the rules, doesn't have a lifetime ban. So that is, again, this double standard where if Rose is the exception to the rule, Bonds isn't applied to that. That rule doesn't apply to Bonds and vice versa.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, they could then, you know, on the other side, they could say, well, he got his 10 years, you know, on the ballot. So, you know, he got his chance with the writers and he'll get his chance with the Veterans Committee, we assume, at some point. And, you know, so, and same goes for Clemens. So, I mean, it's so complicated. They really made it a mess. Those guys, Bonds and Clemens and all those guys, they made it a mess for everybody, you know, so it is what it is. Doesn't mean they shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah. I think the ramifications of Bonds and Clemens being the two guys at the top with the PEDs, I think it's really going to be 30 years. You know, the more I think about it, the more we talk, where it'll take that long because, as you said, hey, blue ribbon panel, let's get all the guys in that should be in. I feel like that's what the Veterans Committees are going to be doing now going forward is, do we have to put Bonds on this ballot? Because even just getting on that veterans ballot, so to speak, of 8 players is a major hurdle just to get onto it. So
that's why I think they should just, you know, stop limiting it like that. And even if it's just a one-time thing, just go after everyone who needs to be looked at again and give them a good look and then kind of clean the slate a little bit. And then moving forward, you know, that's the other thing too, is like you mentioned it earlier, that it's just 2 different ways to get into the Hall of Fame. And they're so different. I've talked to a Hall of Famer who said, I'm glad I got in with the writers because it feels different when the writers vote you in than it does if you get in by, it's almost like a backdoor, the Veterans Committee to some people and even some players, I think. So I think something needs to be done about that too. There needs to be a uniform way to do this. You know, I don't know what that is. The answers aren't easy, but I don't think it should be done the way it's done because it's just 2 completely different voting groups and 2 completely different ways of voting. Where you got certain rules for the BBWAA and their balloting, and you got certain rules for the Veterans Committee.
But then, Manny, what would we talk about in the off season?
Exactly. So, I mean, that's the thing. It's like we're hard pressed from all sides. If we get what we want here, then it's like, well, what are we going to talk about? You know, it's tough. But that's, you know, then again, you know, the fact that these are difficult questions make it worth talking about. Whatever happens, regardless, whatever happens.
We also live in a time now too, where who you are off the field has a lot of cachet, has a lot of weight. Like we all know Ty Cobb did a lot of bad things. He was still elected as part of the first class of Hall of Famers in 1936, but it's not 1936 anymore, right? The toothpaste is out of the container. Who you are as a person is almost more, well, it is more important now than it was then, but it's just as important as, you know, your statistics when you were on the field. And so, you know, there are other guys that aren't in the Hall of Fame right now that, you know, weren't tied to PEDs at all, but were controversial figures and continue to be that way. And
I think that's why Dick Allen, that's why it took so long for Dick Allen. A lot of the writers that just didn't like him. And I hate that. I think it's a baseball Hall of Fame. So the best players should be in there. It's pretty simple, I think. There's a character clause and everything else, but I think that's been weaponized a little bit up to the point where were keeping people out because where do you draw the line? Like, yeah, if you're a murderer or something, if the Ray Lewis situation happened, I'm not saying, I'm not passing judgment on Larry Lewis, but if the Ray Lewis situation happened where he was implicated in some sort of crime, serious crime, if that happened in baseball, that's a different story. But, where it comes to the things like with Bonds and Clemens and all that, a lot of people, let's face it, Barry Bonds, if he was a little nicer to the writers, he would definitely have made it on the writers' ballot because he wasn't that far off. I mean, he was in the 60s, right, or the higher 50s. So it wasn't like he was so far off that he never stood a chance. Like what we're seeing with A-Rod, I don't know if he'll ever crack 50. But I don't think if you're a writer, like when we get our votes, right? I think you're probably like 5 years away or something like that. And I'm somewhere in there,
yeah,
like 3 or 4 years away. When we get our votes, or I can only speak for myself. When I get my vote, I'm not going to care if a guy was a jerk to me. I can't. I got to leave that at the door and say, does he belong in the Hall of Fame or not? I could weaponize that character clause by saying, man, he was a jerk, so I'm just going to use this clause here and make it all about that. And I'm not going to vote for him. But I think that's wrong. I think it's a baseball Hall of Fame. Best players belong in there. I'm glad Dick Allen finally got in, but he should have been in a long time ago. And it was a lot of it, I think, was because he was a controversial character.
And we also, I could go down so many rabbit holes with that. That's good in theory that you would vote for someone that wasn't nice to you. Obviously, you don't have to name names, but is there someone that you're like, you know what, this guy's got a shot, and I am going to actually have to live through this moment? Is that going to be a real scenario for you?
Yeah.
It's interesting. Yeah. But I think now we have a system in place with these public ballots that, okay, let's see what kind of person you are or kind of voter you are, because now we see, thanks to Ryan Spader's Baseball Hall of Fame tracker.
Thibodeau, right? Yeah, Thibodeau. Spader's the other guy. Yeah.
And one of the things that actually came out of the last BBWA meeting we had at the winter meetings, and I'm not sure how public this has totally been made, but there could be some changes that may come about with the ballots and what's made public, because I think more writers than not want it to be a uniform rule of everyone, your vote is public and not your choice. Like, let's make it all one way and not a choice, like, because that's what it should be, partially because there are, again, a good majority or a good large group of active writers who are there at the ballpark doing their job. They're okay with being public. Like, this is part of your responsibility.
You should be okay with it. And I think that I'm totally for that, because it's a heavy responsibility, and there need to be deterrents in place so that people take it seriously. Like, you can't just be like, just give it a cursory look and it's like, yeah, this guy looks like a Hall of Famer to me and blah, blah, blah. I think if we learn anything in the last few years, it's that, maybe the last 10 years, it's that there are a lot of guys who get overlooked because people don't dig hard enough. And once people start digging hard enough and listening to the arguments for and against, they sometimes change their minds, and that's okay. And that should be a part of the process. Everyone should be willing and open-minded enough to change their minds if they see convincing evidence that this person should be a Hall of Famer. And I think if you have every ballot, regardless of whether you want it to be or not, being posted out there, you'll think twice before being lax about, how you go about your process of deciding.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of voters that don't really care to be lumped in with those people who are private. And that one guy who decided, I'm not going to vote for Derek Jeter, and I don't want you to know who I am.
And that's the other thing, right? I mean, that'll make people think twice about doing that sort of thing as well.
It hurts the reputation in many ways of the BBWA. So you know what? Let's see if we can avoid that. And then if you do want to say no to Derek Jeter, then you said it. We all know who it is. And, maybe get a couple, nasty messages.
Yeah, that's a great
online.
point. It doesn't blanket it across everybody and kind of put a cloud over the whole organization or association. It actually, if we know who it was, we can say, hey, this is the guy. If anybody's credibility is hurt by it, it should be that guy or that gal. It should be that person who actually did make that call for themselves.
The Rockies Insider with me, Patrick Lyons, with Manny Randhawa of MLB.com, author of Blake Street Bombers. Make sure you check out that copy. And Yeah,
Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's not shameless for me, man. That's the least I can do for you. I got to talk about getting a couple copies from you actually when we get off the air here.
Yeah, sure.
I'm not kidding about that.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the class of 2025. Man, we're mere hours away from finding out, what's going to go down, who's going in this summer. We've pretty much already talked a little bit about this, and you're not a small hall guy, right? Do you see there being at least 10 guys on this 28 player ballot?
No, I don't. I
think
that
less than 10.
Yeah, I think that what's happened in the past couple of years is, because a lot of times you'll get just a stacked class coming in where it's like, whoa, we've got, just because it just happens to be like the year Cal Ripken and Tony Gwynn went in the same year. It's like you get some all-time greats coming in at the same time and some other guys who are at least worthy of real consideration. I don't think we're really there right now. We've got some guys that maybe kind of are like, hey, maybe he might be a Hall of Famer. Like you could make a case like for Chase Utley or some. There are a couple of guys you could make the case for, but Dustin Pedroia is not going to move the needle. And some of the first time guys this time around, Felix Hernandez was so good for that portion of time, but he's not going to be a Hall of Famer. So I think it really depends on the class. I don't think there's 10 right now. I think once the steroid guys fell off, it was always 10 for me when the steroid guys were on there. Most of them, because Bonds, Clemens, Manny Ramirez, he's still on there actually, but I think he's a Hall of Famer. But it's all case by case with those guys. But I think now at this point, I think it's under 10. Yeah,
I've gone back and looked at decades past, 80s, 90s, maybe not as much, since that's still somewhat current as far as the landscape of all of professional baseball, right? But if you look at some of those ballots from the 60s and the 50s and 40s, they did things very differently. But
it's like crazy. They checked like 2 guys or 3 guys off.
Yeah. There's like 50, 60 guys on the ballot. Also, I mean, like Yogi Berra was a second ballot guy. You go,
Joe DiMaggio was a third ballot guy.
Exactly.
Crazy.
It's crazy to think about.
Yeah.
But if you look at those 50 player ballots over time, because of these veterans committees, 25 plus eventually got in. So for me, my take is almost, and because I'm, a lot less of a small hall guy, I'm a big hall guy. When my time comes, I'll be voting for 10. And even if there's, that last guy that, like you said, maybe there's only 8 or 9 for you. If I was in one of those predicaments, I think I'd vote for, that's final 1 or final 2, just to keep someone's name out there for, as you said previously in our conversation, those people who maybe aren't doing their homework enough and they need to go back and go, Mark Burley was never an ace, but boy, oh boy, look at those numbers.
Mark Burley has a sneaky good case.
Yes, exactly.
He really does. It's interesting.
I think as people start doing, digging deeper and looking and go, okay, because there are, until you are truly a Hall of Famer, you have that next to your name on your baseball reference page, you're a Hall of Very Good. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Are they? Because there's really just that small percentage of players that are definitively, no doubt, Hall of Famers, where even during their career, people said, oh, Hall of Famer so-and-so. But then there are other guys. Literally, if you could go into the Wayback Machine and look at every single article ever written about Larry Walker, probably also true for Todd Helton, there might not be any article that describes those players as future Hall of Famer.
Oh yeah.
Todd Helton. They might say, hey, he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame, that guy, but you couldn't definitively say.
You couldn't say things that you say about Mike Trout. You couldn't say things you say about Clayton Kershaw. Now, currently, you could say, you'll see articles. I've written it, future Hall of Famer, so-and-so. Absolutely right. And I think this, what you just put out there, the whole no doubt Hall of Famer, you could call them future Hall of Famers when they were playing, versus the other guys. I think that first category, that's basically those are the only guys who got in early on in the history of the Hall of Fame.
Right.
Just those guys. And then as time went on, especially in the last 10 or 20 years, I think we've started to, because of the sabermetrics, because we have more ways of looking at it now, there's just so much more to look at to evaluate players. So now there's much better reason to dig deeper and say, wait, like you're talking about Mark Burley. I mean, is he Hall of Famer? I don't know, but he's got a case that you can't ignore. You got to look into it. You got to look at it. You can't just bypass his name, which is what has happened throughout the history of voting, I think, a lot.
Yeah, you got to do that homework. And, for some, like, if it's not that slam dunk, you definitely got to go back. You got to take a look at those players. Do you think so? Right now, we'll take a look at the tracker. There's been 177 public ballots at Not Mr. Tibbs or at notmrtibbs.com on Blue Sky. Ryan Spader does a great job of tracking it. 177 public ballots that have gone out, 11 that have been made available to him. That's only 48% of all ballots. And I think a lot of them will come out Tuesday night, on Wednesday.
Yeah, this is about how many he gets to usually by Monday night before. It's usually about half where he gets to. That's around where he gets to. And then, a lot drop on Tuesday night, and it's a flurry after the announcement, I think. So,
and right now
we have trends. We know kind of how these things go now. After seeing this, it's a great service that guy does, man. Ryan Tibbett. I mean, the fact that he has built this tracker and has been so good with updating it every year, and he's got a team now doing it. That's a great service, man. I mean, if we weren't able to tell the trend, how it was trending, imagine that kind of a world where we're just going to honestly have to wait until the announcement to really know. Really have a good idea.
It's great. And I, there was a debate, I felt like a couple years ago, of like, is it ruining the announcement because we kind of know what to expect? I don't think it does. I think, okay, yeah, we would have been confident of Ichiro getting in anyway. And so, all right, I think
we still have that suspense because there are guys like Heldon. I did not expect him to get in last year. This year, yeah, for sure, but not last year. And then boom, he's announced, and it's a big deal. Walker, obviously, we didn't like. I mean, that was crazy. It was unbelievable that he actually made it. So we still got that even with the tracker being there, because, like you said, if he's a slam dunk guy, you already know he's going to be in. So like Ichiro, for example, we would have known that regardless of if we had a tracker.
So it might dim that light ever so slightly for anyone that thought maybe Ichiro was on the fence, but it brightens everybody else's and it makes it that much more interesting. Yep. Ichiro right now at 100%. Did you see that Ichiro was recently inducted into the Japanese Baseball Hall of Fame? Manny, what percentage of votes do you think Ichiro got for the Japanese Baseball Hall of Fame?
That's a tough one, man. 100?
92.8%.
You got to be kidding me. Really?
Yeah.
That's insane.
That makes no sense, right?
That makes no sense at all. He's the greatest player, Shohei Ohtani pending, to ever come out of Japan.
That's crazy, right?
I'd be curious what their voting process is like, but come on, man. That's ridiculous.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I guess the argument would be like, if you're thinking about the Japanese Baseball Hall of Fame as like the NPB Hall of Fame, and so again, on one hand, his numbers were still great with the Oryx Blue Wave before he came over, but then after that, he didn't compile enough because he was overplaying in a different league, and so
I just think you gotta bring in the major league stats, man, because it's the highest league in the world, so doesn't really make sense.
92.8%.
I can't. That's crazy.
Do you think he'll be the first position player to get to finish with 100%?
Yes, I do.
You do?
Yep. I think he's going to finish with 100. Usually if we're seeing behavior such as a lot of first timers getting a few votes here and there, that lends you to think maybe guys are hitting their 10-man limit and they want to make sure to get that guy a vote, and maybe they know Ichiro is going to get in, so knock him off, so that they can vote for Carlos Gonzalez or whoever, Troy Tulowitzki. Carlos Gonzalez, Troy Tulowitzki, there are 7 guys who haven't gotten a vote out of the 14 first-time guys. So it doesn't look like that's kind of happening this year. So I think, given that, I think that everybody will have room enough to check off Ichiro and still have 9 places be enough for them this time around. So
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something I've talked about a lot this offseason with Cargo and Tulo both getting no votes. Honestly, it's not a surprise to me, especially when you consider Matt Holliday only got 4 last year. And this is just kind of how, voters, it's sometimes it can be different, when you have MVP voting and you got 10 names, you throw someone a bone. I wouldn't necessarily. I've never thrown someone a bone like that. Also, all my ballots that I've ever voted for at the end of the year awards have only been 3 deep. But even still, I don't think you want to just give something out necessarily. I think that happens less and less. But I would have figured maybe one person out there. And again, we're only at 48%, but
I would have thought by this point we'd have a couple of votes for those guys. I think it's a pointless exercise, and it's all based on the way the rules are for voting, which are I still think they're so antiquated, and we don't need a 10-man limit. We're not going to put too many people in the Hall of Fame. I'm not a big Hall guy. I'm a bigger Hall guy. So I wouldn't have voted if Harold Baines is on the ballot. I wouldn't have voted for him. I mean, there's certain guys, there's certain Jim Catt, there are certain guys, I know it's happening through the Veterans Committee, but that I don't think are Hall of Famers. But I do think I still think it's too small at this point. I don't think you need to have a 10-man limit to make sure that it doesn't get overinflated. But Troy Tulowitzki's not a Hall of Famer. Cargo's not a Hall of Famer. Great players, not Hall of Famers. So honestly, it's kind of pointless. It's nice that they get the recognition of being on the ballot, but it really doesn't matter if you got a vote or not to keep you on if you're never going to get in.
Yeah, no, I agree. It is an honor, but then it can be like no one, like that's almost embarrassing. Like at that point, everyone needs to get together in some kind of group chat and like, all right, is somebody going to vote for, Adam Jones? All right, I'll take that one. I covered him a little bit. All right, I'll do Fernando Rodney. He was nice to me.
I would think that at least some of the beat writers who cover these guys would throw him a vote or two. And I'm sure that by the end, there will be a couple of votes for these guys. Adam Jones, yeah, for sure. I think he'll get a couple of votes. Tulo, Cargo, they'll get a couple. But yeah, it's a pointless exercise in the end.
Going back to the 100% conversation, I really thought after Mariano got to 100% that, leading up to that, I don't know if there was conversation about will anyone get 100%, but it was in the ether a little bit. And because of how nice he was, and because, despite the fact that he was a closer, which also is like mind blowing to think about, like there's not a ton in, and the one guy to get it is a closer, like, all right, whatever. But okay, he gets 100%. And it was like, we did this thing, right? The voters, hey, we did it. Somebody finally got 100. Now you can kind of end that conversation and let's move on. And for that reason, it feels like I don't think we would ever get another 100% player. And so it's for that reason, I don't think Ichiro is going to get 100%. I just think it'll just never happen again. If Ichiro can't get 100% in his own country of Japan, Manny, come on, he's going to get 100 here?
I think he will. And I think it's just, there's so much more to it, because with him being from Japan and coming over here being the first position player, his resume is so stacked, man. I mean, I remember when he was here, you remember when he was here for that weekend, he got his 3,000 hit. Were you here that year?
I was in the stands. I was in right field. Okay. And in fact, when watching a clip of that, I can pick myself out of where I was, because I got a seat on the aisle. And as soon as the ball went off his bat,
you're thinking, man,
I jumped into the aisle. I went down 3 rows and then realized it was going to fall short. Yeah. Meanwhile, there was a guy in the front row. He actually stepped over the railing and was standing on top of the auxiliary scoreboard. He did get kicked out. But
yeah. So when he did that, I mean, like a couple of days before, I went and I talked to his interpreter, and I knew he was sick of questions, because he was stuck on like 2998 at that point for like a month, because he was not an everyday player. He'd get a pitch hit appearance here and there. And so I kind of, I told his interpreter, Alan Turner, I said, I know he's probably sick of this. And then Ichiro cuts our conversation off, and then starts speaking in Japanese. And the interpreter said, he says that if you ask him a question he's never heard about the chase for 3,000, he'll answer it, or something like that. So he put me on the spot. But when he answered my question, he basically really said something pretty deep about what it meant for him to get to 3,000. And I think it's going to be the same way for his Hall of Fame speech, in the sense of, it was really important to me to show how good Japanese baseball is. And boy, did he do that when he came over. Like, we saw Nomo. We had seen Nomo at that point, but we had never seen a real Japanese hitter come over. And obviously, if you hadn't seen that, you're going to automatically assume that Major League Baseball is just far superior to whatever they've got going on in NPB. But look at the greatest player on the planet today is from NPB, Shohei Ohtani. We've got a long list of guys who have come. The Mets, Hideki Matsui, the Matsuis of the world. We've had a lot of pitchers, come over. We've had Yu Darvish, some of the guys who are still in there. It's a long list, and he was kind of, Nomo and Ichiro were the Trailblazers, and he made it a big deal. And I think it is a big deal to say, I really wanted to show how good we are. And right now, he opened that door for Ohtani and all these guys, Roki Sasaki, all these guys, him and Nomo did that. And I think that because he has that on his resume, that's why there's that little extra oomph there on his case that I think helps him, and I think we'll get him to 100.
That's so interesting what you said, because if anyone doesn't hear that, I would have voted for Ichiro. That's easy. But there are other guys where if you don't hear a beautiful soliloquy like you just stated right there, you might, on a fringy guy, say no. But then when you hear it re-explained in that way and go, wow, yeah, think of all these things that Ohtani has done in the last few years, even just this past season with 50-50, that seemed impossible. It would have been impossible had it not been Ichiro breaking that barrier as the first position player from Asia to come over. Not just the first to have success. He was the first. He was number one. And so when you put in that context of like, wow, what's happening today couldn't have happened without this guy. Well, then he does deserve to get that recognition, because it's nothing you're going to find on Baseball Reference. You're not going to find that on his baseball card. It's only one of those things you can happen by either knowing your history incredibly well or talking with other people and not being in a silo and say, hey, what are your thoughts on this guy? I hadn't thought about that perspective. You know what? Right. I think I flipped. Right. And we've lost that obviously in our country in various different ways about not being able to have conversations like this. But when you open yours and you're listening, man, you can learn a lot.
Yeah. And people say, oh, you're a numbers guy or whatever. Yeah, I am. But that doesn't negate the other part. That doesn't negate the human element, as people like to say, or that other side of it. Because if you take that out of the picture, it's boring. And Ichiro, there's just so much that he did for baseball in that country and for the country of Japan as a whole. You fast forward 20 years and you're seeing with this Ohtani phenomenon. And like you said, it all started back in the late 90s, early 2000s with Nomo, and then really Ichiro. Nomo had his moment and he was amazing for a couple of years, but then he was kind of an league average pitcher for most of the rest of his career. Whereas Ichiro, coming over mid-career, because he had been a pro for 10 seasons already, 8 seasons, something like that. And he goes in 10 straight Gold Gloves, 10 straight All-Star games, wins the MVP and Rookie of the Year in the same year. Only Fred Lynn has done that in baseball history besides Ichiro. Just because, it's just there's just so much there. And I think that we need to understand these guys at a secondary level, not just the numbers. There's more to guys than that. And that's why certain guys, are in the Hall of Fame who were trailblazers and good players. Jackie Robinson's like the main guy you think of is, he didn't get to play very long because he came in and he was already in his late 20s, because he was the one to break the color barrier. And he was a great player. MVP, they named the Rookie of the Year award after him because he was the Rookie of the Year. I think the first Rookie of the Year that they handed out was him. But there's so much more to his story because of what he did, as far as societally, culturally, all of it. So there's obviously the element to that can't be ignored, and Ichiro has that.
Yeah, I would love to say, and I would have said Hideo Nomo, has a much better chance of being a Hall of Famer. Now that's still true. Now, once Ichiro gets in, that's still a true statement. It's a better shot.
Right.
And, as you said, great for a period of time, then fell off. 21.8 wins above replacement, 4.24 ERA, 123 wins, which if you did that nowadays, you probably were borderline. But you also, I don't know if this, I think it might make his plaque, has thrown the only no-hitter.
Of course, yeah.
So, that in and of itself.
That's good for something, man. That's something to have on your resume.
Immediately goated if you do that. That's it.
He's only one guy who's done it. And there might, you know what? You and I in our lifetime, we might not see it happen again. Kyle Freeland came so close. 2 outs away.
Melky, and too, believe it or not.
Yeah, Melky Cabrera, a little broken bat over Nolan Arenado's. Arenado still doesn't forgive himself for not grabbing, even though it was clearly over his head. So that was the closest I think anybody has come, whether home or away, visiting team or the Rockies. And Nomo did that after a rain delay. So,
right.
Today he probably wouldn't even started that game.
No.
After that, incredible. He was for that short burst of time was one of the great pitchers of all time. But it was really short, partly because again, these guys come over here midway through their careers.
All right,
and then Nomo did throw another no hitter later in 2001 with the Red Sox.
That's right.
I think Dante Bichette was on that team.
Might have been.
I think Dante was on that team. Dante Bichette. He was in that outfielder on that team.
All right, Manny. Do you want to make a pact? Let's make a pact. Okay?
All right. What we got?
Whoever is the survivor between the two of us, whoever's the last one standing.
Okay.
On your deathbed, if no one has thrown a no-hitter at Coors Field or Monfort Meatpacking Stadium 2.0 out by DIA, the next one that they built. If no one else
they'll build it out there.
A no-hitter.
They build it out there, hopefully I am on my deathbed by that point. So
our last words it has to be Nomo should be in the Hall of Fame. do we have a pact? Do we agree on that?
Oh man. Two things. No, I'm not gonna number one, I'm gonna remember it to do it. So I would just fail that pact automatically. And I think I'll probably have something more significant to say than that.
Yeah, maybe.
I tell you what, I can promise you that I'll try to promise you that if I can remember that I will say it at some point on my last day on earth. How about that?
Oh, it's in there. It's in the back. You're still going to be talking baseball. Like, let's face it. Like that's
I can say that
game on the TV. Like, just keep it down. Let me just close my eyes and rest. And then there we go.
I'll try to remember to say something about that on that day. How's that?
I like it. No, that works for me. All right. Let's take a look at the ballot. Let's at the numbers here. We are on the eve of the announcement, and it's looking good for Ichiro. As we said, he's already at 100%. Second on that list, CC Sabathia, ton of support, 93.6%. He would have gotten a vote from me as well. Next on that list is Billy Wagner in his 10th and final season, 84.6%. Could he lose close to, or a little bit more than 9% because of those private ballots? Because it's his 10th year, I'm going to think not. I'm going to think that.
I think he's a lock.
Yeah, I think he is too.
And that's great because he should have been in the Hall of Fame. 422 saves, whatever his ERA was below 2.5, I think. He was an all-star in his final year and had one of the best seasons of his career in his last year of his career. He had a 1.5 ERA for the Braves. Diminutive left-hander, through gas. There are too few closers. Okay, it's just fact. And relievers in the Hall of Fame. That needs to change too. Those poor guys, man, just because they're relievers, they just don't get as much love. It's just simple as that. There are guys who are not going to, are not closers, who are incredible relievers, who don't get the time of day. I mean, they don't get a look at all. So I think it's great that he's going to get in.
Yeah, it is wild to think that it did take him the entire. He know who he is. Billy Wagner is the closer version of Larry Walker. Took 10 years, but it was we all knew it on year one. We all knew.
I think that's fair. I think so. He's been making good strides the last 3 or 4 years, like Walker did in his last 3 or 4. So I think that's a good comp.
Yeah. Next on that list, a little surprised that this player has gotten such a big boost. I think he is a Hall of Famer. He's not in that inner ring, but one of those players you look and go, wow, he really did have a crazy great career. The fact that it's happening so quick in year 3, again, a lot of controversy surrounding this player. But Carlos Beltrán right now at 80.3%. I think he might end up falling short again because of those private ballots are a little more conservative.
He'll get right up to it. He'll get right there.
Are you surprised that he's gotten this support that much quickly? Or you think, like me, it was going to probably take maybe year 6 or 7?
I thought at least 4 or 5 years. So I'm surprised he's getting this much support. At this rate, he'll get in next year. So no, 4 or 5. I probably did more like you. I probably thought it was like 6 or 7, because of the people were going to punish him for the Astros sign stealing thing. He's an easy Hall of Famer. Just by the numbers. Yeah, you could punish him for the Astros thing, but how good he was, even with that, I am surprised he's getting it this quick. But I figured he would eventually get in there.
I hope in a weird way. I see connections and all kinds of weird things, but hopefully in some way this opens the door for Mark McGwire. And here's why: because Beltrán was the scapegoat in many ways, right? Like maybe there were a lot of goats that were there, but he was the number one scapegoat as far as players were concerned. Lost his job as a manager of the Mets, right before the pandemic at the end of 2019. So he lost that gig and was kind of made that poster child. And he fell on that sword. And the fact that he's getting in so quickly after that makes me hope that maybe that would benefit McGwire, because he sat down, I think it was with Bob Costas, and said, okay, fine, I'll say what you want me to say so I can be welcomed back and work with the next generation of hitters, and I can be a hitting coach, and I can come back to the game that I love, that loved me, and that benefited from what I did, probably more than I did. The game benefited from McGwire and Sosa. And so despite the fact that McGwire fell on the sword, it didn't help him get into the Hall of Fame. Maybe now with Beltrán having done that, some people will begin to realize, hey, you know what? McGwire did the same thing too. Let's go ahead and make an exception and get him into the Hall as well.
Well, the key difference will be, that the manner of cheating and how long it went on. So Beltrán was part of that 17 team. McGwire was shooting up with Canseco in the bowels of the Coliseum in the late 80s. So if certain people are to be believed, right? So, and, it's not hard to see that because he's always been, very muscular. Really, the Bash brothers had their name for a reason. And then the whole is just the picture of him sitting there completely embarrassed in front of Congress, almost, choking up, almost crying, like trying not to talk about steroids. I want to talk to the positive and not the negative. It was just such a naive thing to say. And, on the advice of my attorney, I won't say anything. That's got to get out of people's minds before it happens. And it could. But, for me, McGwire has always been, McGwire and Sosa were both difficult calls for me for different reasons. Sosa, because he transformed overnight into a different guy, a different player. McGwire was always hit. If he had been healthy, and that might have been the steroids that caused the issues that he had. He always had a lot of soft tissue injuries and things like that. But if he had been healthy, he always hit home runs at a furious rate. He would have gotten to 60 if he had been healthy years before that. So, I don't know. It's hard to say because of the injuries, because of all that. It's hard to say, and because of the whole steroids thing. So I don't know. It's a tough call for me, but can I see it happening? Yeah, in the future, the Veterans Committee with the right people on it could happen.
Trying to speak it into existence. Maybe this is a weird question. Would it be more sad? And you're the perfect guy to ask. Again, a guy growing up in the Bay Area, so you saw both of their careers at various primes, right? Mm-hmm. But would it be more sad if one didn't get in over the other? Where again, Dick Allen passed away, and you go that he should have been in, and then eventually he gets in after his passing, and you're like, still, that's just utterly sad that he never got his flowers while he was alive. Is there one that would be more sad than the other, just for you as not the journalist, but almost as the fan, as a kid who grew up in the Bay Area?
Yeah, I think it would be Bonds because of the sheer. It goes right back to why Bonds did it, right? At least from what we understand from Game of Shadows and from various sources, that Bonds did the thing not because he needed to. Obviously, he was already a world-class player. I mean, he was one of the great players, all-around players in the game. He was the best player of the 90s. People oftentimes think about Ken Griffey Jr. It's not close. Barry Bonds was like significantly better than Ken Griffey Jr. Jr. had the style. He hit more homers, but all around, and he was a really flashy center fielder and a great defensive center fielder. But Bonds, between his eye, between all of that, his on-base percentage, between the things that he was able to do even defensively, lack of an arm, but otherwise, he was way better. You look at the WAR; he had 100 WAR in the 90s, 100, and that's before steroids. Or you could take maybe lop off 1 year of the 90s, 99 maybe, and so just the fact that he he knew he had so much more talent than McGuire and Sosa and these guys that were getting all this adulation. That's why he did it seems. And of course, that doesn't make it right, and I'm not condoning it, but it's the same principle on why it would be sadder for him not to get in my eyes, because he was that much better. Like he's the guy that you talked about in the late 90s and said future Hall of Famer. And people did on the All-Star games, Bob Costas would be like future Hall of Fame, it was a foregone conclusion. And then of course he messed it all up. So, but I think it would be more sad in that case.
That's a great response. For me, it's McGuire, because I was an A's fan.
Sure.
That was my first Little League team.
Hey man, if you're asking as a fan, that's always a big part of it, right?
Oh, sure. Well, that was my Little League team growing up. So I was like, oh, okay, I like the A's, and they were really good at the time. But what you said again, it resonates that it's sadder for Bonds from that perspective of 1998 ends, future Hall of Famer Barry Bonds, he's in, and he's looking around going, so we're just cool with this, right? Just to make sure we are cool with this, right? Major League Baseball. Yeah. All right, cool.
And that's true too. I mean, it's still not right what he did, but at the same time, he would have looked around, like you said, survey the landscape. People are just, there's so much adulation for these two guys with the home run race that, like, I know these guys have been playing with these guys for 15 years already. I am way better than they are. He's got an ego. We know that, but like for him, he wouldn't be lying, because he really was that good. He is, non-active players, greatest player I've ever seen with my eyes, like in person. So that's how good he was. Like I said, 200 plus OPS in back-to-back years in the mid 90s. His down years were Hall of Fame years. So
yeah. I mean, when you look around and you say there's no penalty, we're not being encouraged necessarily, but there is zero discouragement. All right.
That's a guy who obviously never cared what people thought of him. So he really, it wasn't a big leap, I don't think, for him to go and do it. Like he wouldn't worry. I wouldn't think he would be worried about like the fan response or anything like that.
And he also grew up in the game. Like, let's not forget that players have always used some kind of performance enhancing.
Oh yeah, he would have seen greenies being dunked in coffee,
amphetamines. So like, again, growing up in the game, knowing like, all right, well, this is just the next iteration of that. We're just going to use steroids to stay a little bit healthier on the field and, hit the ball a little bit further, and everyone's doing it. Like, yeah, everyone did it with the greenies, and there was no penalties for that. So there's, by theory, this is going to be the same thing here too. You're right. For that reason, it's sadder, because he was there, and it's almost like the signs he was getting all around him, he read them right, at least at that time, but he was punished for them in a double standard kind of way.
Like you said, you could just cut it right off at 98 for both guys, right? McGuire just set the record, hit 70 homers, and Bonds was clean up until that point. At that point, which one of them is a Hall of Famer? And which are they both? I don't think so. I think at that point, it's probably only Bonds of those two. And that's what makes it a little bit more difficult for him if he never gets in or never sees it. And I don't think they should give him a speech. There should be some penalty for cheating the game, but they should put his plaque up, and he should be in the Hall of Fame. He should have that honor, because he was the greatest position player of an entire decade. I mean, that's before steroids. It's unbelievable. And Clemens was the opposite Clemens was the same for pitchers.
I think some people might not realize that when you get into the Hall of Fame, it's a fraternity, and some guys want their buddies in that fraternity. Some guys have players that they don't want in that fraternity. So, despite the fact that maybe, a certain group of, I think it's 12 that's on the Veterans Committee may want to vote a player in, I don't know what necessarily happens behind the scenes to say, we're not even going to put this guy on the Veterans Committee ballot.
Yeah,
because
there's a lot of
nobody wants to hang out with
politicking that goes on.
Yeah.
With that. I mean, like Tony La Russa was on the panel that voted in Harold Baines, and so I mean, there that definitely goes on. So it. I mean, I've talked to guys who played in that era who have real resentment about Bonds and McGuire and Sosa, and anybody who was known for, because particularly if they didn't do it themselves, the guys that I was talking to didn't do it themselves, and they played clean, and you're robbing from those guys that stay clean because you have an advantage they don't. It's like that story I think Verducci did maybe a long time ago about the guy, he found a guy who didn't make it and a guy who did make it, but the only difference was one of the guys did steroids. I think they were pitchers, and just kind of following their life after that and what happened. And so, yeah, it's a big, I think it's a big deal for a lot of guys who played in that time.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are guys who just don't want to see Bonds ever make it, for example, or Clemens or McGuire or Sosa.
And that's the hardest
part.
Sammy
Sosa finally got a little bit of a welcome back to the north side of Chicago. He was at the Cubs con, and they finally, after all these years, made up with him. So,
yeah. And with what we had been saying in this conversation, the longer you're on the ballot, the greater the likelihood is that you get your 75% because more people are talking about you, and now more people are talking a lot louder about you. Well, even right now, without a veterans committee, there are a lot of people talking loudly about Bonds and a lot of these PED guys.
Great point. Absolutely. I think there are some people who will always be of the position that he was robbed, that he should have been in. Those two guys should be in there, and it'll be interesting. I mean, Pete Rose is dead now, so will they? Because it was a lifetime ban in baseball, and obviously it's not the same with. Those are two different things. It's not the Hall of Fame. Will they, vote him in a veterans committee at some point posthumously? I mean, will they do that? What they did with Dick Allen?
Shoeless Joe's not in.
You're right. That's a fair point. I mean, he's not in. Although, again, I guess it goes back to another question. Like, how soon will the composition of the veterans committee change to the point where there are more a younger cohort, which tends to favor putting in those guys like Pete Rose and who knows, Shoeless Joe maybe even. Because Shoeless Joe's, there are complicating factors to his situation too. It's not all. There's nuance, to that. So if you haven't seen 8 Men Out, great movie. Not you. Great. I mean, I know you've seen it. Your listeners.
Yeah. There's also Jacob Pomeranke from Sabre. I think it was a Sabre book where he did some more research after and kind of found out like, hey, this part was accurate about 8 Men Out, but this other part right here, actually I learned a little bit more information and it was slightly left of center or whatever. Yeah. So,
I'm sure there was some thematic license taken in the movie. But even in the movie, he's made out to be a little bit of a sympathetic character. Out of all the guys, Shoeless Joe's kind of the guy who it was like, yeah, he knew, but he was also kind of just ignorant about a lot of things that were going on. He just didn't understand what was really happening. So I don't know. It seems like the reason why betting on baseball, and I get it, it's absolutely a legitimate thing that penalties have to be super harsh because you gotta uphold the integrity of the game. That's absolutely paramount. So I get that Pete Rose had to be punished severely, and I get the same for Joe Jackson. But the question is, should it be forever? That's the question.
Yeah. Getting back to the 2025 ballot, Andruw Jones, 72.3%. I mean, that also felt like at one point, at least like his last year in his prime with Atlanta, future Hall of Famer Andruw Jones. Yeah. And again, he's still languishing on the ballot with as much as he has right now. He's not getting in this year, but next year, that seems like it might be slim dunk.
My concern about him is he seems to be plateauing. He made some big jumps year to year, and then suddenly it's gone like this. He only increased by 3% last year. This year, I think they're projecting him at 67 or 68 when it's all said and done. So he's kind of plateauing, like with support. So I'm wondering, will he get there? He's going to get a 10th year bump. Everybody does, it seems now. So it'll be close for sure. It'll be close.
The only other player trending above 50% right now, Chase Utley, 53.2%. He's another one where he is probably the model for, post 2000 baseball, in the sense that you don't necessarily have to have a long career, because there's just less and less players with 3,000 hits.
Right.
500 home runs is still somewhat of a rarity. I mean, Giancarlo Stanton, I think, has the most right now at 440. And even that, you're like, 60? It's going to be hard for him to get there. 200 wins even now almost feels like it's the standard for a starting pitcher. So, all things being considered, and you're looking at his prime, and you look at, well, is there going to be anybody from that 2008/2009 team that actually did win it represented in the Hall of Fame other than Roy Halladay? It's all right. Chase Utley might end up being that guy.
Utley has a better case than I think it seems, because how there are people who say, a Hall of Fame when you see one. I don't agree, but yeah, sometimes you do, but not in all cases. And he produced 64.5 WAR. Usually once you get to 65 to 70, you're approaching Hall of Fame territory for position players, mostly. Lou Whitaker obviously is an egregious exception. But there aren't many that aren't. And as far as second baseman for Jaws, I think he's 12th all time, something like that.
It's pretty high.
That's saying something. Yeah, I mean, he's 12th all time, according to Jay Jaffe's Hall of Fame evaluation system, ahead of Lou Whitaker, and right ahead of Lou Whitaker, ahead of Roberto Alomar, ahead of Craig Biggio. So it's hard. I mean, he seems to have a much better case. Right ahead of him are Ryan Sandberg and Jackie Robinson. So a lot of it's defense. He was a very good defensive second baseman. So a lot of it is that. But he was also part of he helped drive a couple of teams to the back-to-back World Series appearances. So his is an interesting case. I don't know if I'm voting for him. I would vote for him or not. I would have to, again, dig even further, but he's got a case.
He does. Yeah, and I misspoke. Halladay, his first year was 2010. So that 2009.
Yeah, he was on that. Yeah, right.
That representation. Yeah. It is weird. Like at the time when he was in his peak, Utley felt like, hey, you know what? He might be able to do it, and he's still in the might be phase, but he did get
him and his teammates. Yeah, like how about Roy? How about Ryan Howard? It looked like for sure, like he hit like 250 homers. He was the youngest to get to like 250 homers, and then after the Achilles heel injury in 2009, I guess. That was it. He never came back from that. And Jimmy Rollins. Some people still think he should get some consideration. I don't know that he's a Hall of Famer, but at that time you could see it.
Yeah, he's at 21.8% right now in his fourth year on the ballot. For Utley, it does feel weird. Okay, he didn't compile, but the fact 4 Silver Slugger awards, okay, nice. Never finished top 5 in MVP, was only top 10 in MVP voting 3 times, only got an MVP vote 5 total times.
Yeah, he's not going to win in any black ink categories, really, for Hall of Fame. Like, he doesn't have a high score there, for sure. But the Jaws is a pretty compelling argument.
Bobby Abreu, 26.1% currently in his 6th year. Burley, 12.2% in his 5th. Felix Hernandez, 26.1% in his 1st year. Justin Pedroia, 15.4% in his 1st year. Andy Pettit, 33% in his 7th year. Manny Ramirez in his 9th year, 36.7%. That's too low of a number to think he's going to get a big boost in year 10.
He's never going to get in on the writer's ballot, which is unfortunate. I think these are all complicated, but he's one of the great right-handed hitters of all time. I think he's I think he's a Hall of Famer, but that's just me.
A-Rod.
Not because we share first name.
That's right. Hey, Manny,
first
Manny.
That's it. First name and then R.A. at the but I really think he's one of the great hitters of all time. Terrible defensive player. He's a one-dimensional guy, but boy, was he good. Boy,
you shouldn't have told me that. Because next time we're in the dugout with Bud Black and you say something or do something, I'll go, hey, just Manny R being Manny R. Everyone's look around and go, oh, yeah, that's right. I had never made that connection.
Yeah. It's so, yeah. I mean, yeah, it was the Manny being Manny, the Manny Wood, the whole thing. I mean, he was such a goof, but he could hit. Wow, could he hit?
Yeah. A-Rod, 41% in his fourth year. K-Rod, Francisco Rodriguez, only at 8%
That's
in
too
his
low.
third year.
That's too low, I think.
Yeah. Homer Vizquel, year 8, 12.2%. And David Wright, 11.2% in his second year. Let's take a look at the at some upcoming class of Hall of Fame real quick, and we'll get out of here. There's a good chance no one makes it in their first year in next year's ballot. That was the case in 2021. Still pandemic. No one got in. 2013, no one got in. In 1996, no one got in. Next year's ballot, I guess, is led by Cole Hamels and Ryan Braun. You got Edwin Encarnacion, Matt Kemp, Shin-Soo Choo are probably the top 5. I don't think anyone's getting in their first year from that group.
Yeah, this is not. It doesn't look that way. This is not a really inspiring class coming in here. First timers. Yeah, you might get a 0 next year.
Yeah,
true.
So that could bode well for anyone that's on.
Well,
there,
you might get Beltrán. You might get Beltrán next year.
Yeah,
but that'd be it.
All right, rapid fire from the 2007 class, and then I'll give you 2008. 2007, you got Buster Posey, John Lester, Ryan Zimmerman, Kyle Seager, Brett Gardner, and then from 2008, Pujols, Robinson Cano, Yadier Molina, David Price, Steven Strasburg, Justin Upton. Who from those two classes do you think might be a first ballot guy?
First of all, because of Buster Posey's retirement at such a young age, and now that he's president of baseball operations, and the fact that I was 26 years old when he came up, this is crazy. He's going to be on the Hall of Fame ballot in a couple of years, but he's going to get in. There's just too much hardware. Some people would say he didn't play long enough and, whatever, but there's too much hardware. 3 World Series championships, an MVP, a Rookie of the Year. He was the best catcher of his time. I would say even over Yadier Molina, even though Yadier Molina is a close second. Yadier Molina is going to be an interesting one because I don't know that he has the numbers to do it. But boy, was he he's one of those guys that was like, man, you can't talk about Yadi without talking about beyond the numbers, talking about his leadership capabilities, his quality, his clutch, performances in the postseason, things like that. So that's going to be an interesting one. I'm not really sure about him. Pujols obviously might be 100%er. Who else was there?
Cano, John Lester.
Cano is going to be really interesting because he probably deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. But then, of course, we have issues there with he was suspended for twice for PEDs. So that'll be tough. What was the other one that you said?
John Lester.
John Lester. Ooh, yeah, that'll be another interesting one.
I think he'll get in. And I'll tell you why in a second. Let me get this one off my plate. Posey, in January of 2027, will be 39. And then when he actually gets...
That might be, besides Koufax.
Koufax might have been a little young, yeah. Because he'll get inducted
but besides him, that's got to be... He'll be 39 when he's on the ballot?
39 in January of 2027, so...
He might even be younger than Koufax was by the time he was eligible.
So John Lester, the case...
Koufax's final season was... he was 35. So, yeah, okay. Koufax... But there aren't many that are going to beat that.
That's going to be hard, yeah. The thing with John Lester is he won't be first ballot, but the case is, and talking about this with some of the Sabre guys, who goes in the Hall of Fame from the 2016 Chicago Cubs? Who has the best case?
That's a great question.
John Lester is already kind of a borderline guy, and if you need someone to be that guy, it's not Chris Bryant. It's not Anthony Rizzo. Kyle Schwarber is kind of doing some things late in his career, but otherwise, who is going to be the face of that? John Lester.
Yeah. I think out of all those guys, I can see that it would be Lester.
It's the narrative, right? For some guys, a narrative can be built, and you go,
yes.
You know what? Like Bill Mazeroski, he's another guy. You look at his numbers and go, "Is this guy a Hall of Famer?" Hey, there's the narrative from 1960.
Well, yeah, and you look at the fact that he won 3 World Series rings. He has an ERA plus of 117, which is higher than several guys who've gotten in. He's a 5-time All-Star. He was the MVP of the NLCS. I think that year, right? 2016 was it? Yeah. So
he's there to break the curse of the Bambino in Boston, and he's there to do it in Chicago.
Yeah, that too.
And that's the narrative. And
you know what? He had a 2.5 ERA in 154 postseason innings. That's legit, man. That screams Hall of Fame. So, I think that if with that 2016 group, he's the guy.
Yeah, I think he is.
If anybody's going to be him, and it's going to be him.
All right, and then the last one, class of 2029. Listen to this group. I think there might be 5 no doubters, but even still, Miguel Cabrera, Joey Votto, Zach Greinke, Adam Wainwright, Madison Bumgarner, Nelson Cruz, Corey Kluber.
I think that's going to be like my first year to vote, actually.
So, you got some decisions to make.
Yeah, so obviously Miggy's going to be in, but
Votto.
Votto is going to be an interesting one. He's got a good case.
Greinke?
I don't know. Greinke's tough. I mean, he was an accumulator. He pitched a long time. I don't
Adam
know
Wainwright. He got to 200 wins.
You know how I feel about wins. So enough said.
We should end on that note. Yeah, it does. But if you can get him, though.
It doesn't hurt to get him because people still pay attention. Some people still pay attention to them. So
closer and starter. I mean, he's the modern day John Smoltz in that way. Yeah, and then Bumgarner, he's got some hardware. Definitely didn't compile. But there are going to be those supporters. Nelson Cruz.
I think he blew his arm out with all those World Series innings or all those playoff innings early in his career. Yeah, too bad because he was on his way. I
think Nelson Cruz might have a sneaky good case. 464 home runs, 1,300 RBI, 130 OPS.
He was one of the great designated hitters,
right?
And there aren't many of those besides Ortiz. Ortiz was the first, right? So, or Edgar was the first, then Ortiz. So only those two are the only guys. You could say Frank Thomas, but he played a lot more first base in the field than those guys. So
who's an all-star at age 40?
Yeah, I think Nelson Cruz has a case. I think he's probably a Hall of Famer.
And for everything that he does as like the general manager of the Dominican Republic, he's like a statesman. You're like, oh wow, okay, this guy is special, right?
Yeah, he's clean too, right? He's never had any issues with anything, right?
I don't know. I'll say that.
Right.
If I was more confident, I would say yes, no issue.
I mean, as far as like actually reported and actually legitimately, there's evidence that he did something.
I'd have to look that one up. I don't think any suspensions. I can be confident of that. But going back to our beginning of our conversation, I'm willing to look the other way. At least for the guys in the 90s with the performance enhancing drugs, because that wasn't against the rules. After that, and now it becomes a little bit murkier. But if gun to my head, would you honestly, put a guy in that got a PED suspension in versus not? I'd more likely than not make that mistake and put them into Cooperstown. I
think Cruz, because he started his career in 2005, I mean, he would have gotten caught, most likely.
Yeah.
And so because they had toughened up the rules so much by that point. So, and he only played in 50 games those first 2 years. So really, he didn't have his first full season until 2009. That was the first time he played over 100 games. So, and got over 330 at bats. So plate appearances. So really, we're talking 2009 and 10. So yeah, I mean, I think he's a Hall of Famer. I don't think there's anything standing in his way.
Yeah, Corey Kluber, probably not, but dude's got 2 Cy Young awards. Not a
lot. His case, yeah, but I don't think he gets there.
Yeah, probably not. But
he was like one of the best pitchers on earth for like 3 years. For like a three-year period. So
it's a much longer conversation, the idea of what's a Hall of Famer now, because I think it's just so much harder to figure that out because guys aren't compiling. Guys are stepping away because of their health, like a Buster Posey. And
careers are shorter.
So well now that they don't need to play so long.
Mm-hmm. Careers are shorter, a lot more injuries, particularly on the pitching side. So that we have to recalibrate our expectations for guys now.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if it took another 15, 20 years for that recalibration to really take place. And you go, oh, you know what? Yeah, Tim Lincecum was a Hall of Famer.
Everything happens slowly in this game, man, for whatever reason, in terms of change. I think, what did it
better be good now.
Yeah, I'm blanking on his name, but guy who brought Jackie Robinson in, general manager, great. Branch Rickey. He said something about how baseball is allergic to change, and so we may have gotten somewhat better at that, but we still move kind of slowly.
That's it.
That stuff.
Manny, this has been fun.
Always fun. Man.
I know we said an hour, but
we always go over. When you say hour, I'm always thinking about 80 or 90 minutes.
I was gonna say, and look, we could have gone 3, so I think we showed some
pretty well
restraint, and hopefully when you catch your breath after this, drink a glass of water. You'll go, you know what? There was a couple of things that was said in there that sparked my mind to go down some rabbit hole.
Always.
Go ahead and plug away. Let folks know where they can check your stuff out at, and as well as where they can get a copy of Blake Street Bombers. Fantastic book.
Thank you. MLB.com is who I write for. So usually, especially this time of year, you'll see a lot on the homepage there. And then Manny on MLB, I'll put my stuff up on Twitter or X, whichever you prefer. And then I've been thinking about Blue Sky. I don't know. I mean, I've been thinking about it because X is just so broken.
True.
It's broken. It's just, Elon it's been much worse. So I thinking about that, but right now Manny on MLB on Twitter, X, and that's pretty much where I'm active. So check that out. Blake Street Bombers. Just go to Amazon.com, and if you type in Blake Street Bombers, the first result will be the book. So,
boom, that's perfect. And yeah, you know what? Maybe you won't actually even have to make the decision about Blue Sky. It's like TikTok. It's already gone. So you know what? If you didn't get on it, then you didn't have to worry about it. So maybe you can wait it out. You can wait them out.
Maybe. I don't know. I go back and forth. We'll see.
At Patrick D. Lyons MLB, or at Rockies Insider, anywhere you consume those social medias. Manny, I appreciate you joining me and giving me plenty of momentum for the rest of the week.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you. Look, I like to say it, just like when it comes to starting pitching or the next day's starting pitcher. My momentum is only as good as my next show, so I'll talk to everybody then.